It's also my job to introduce the fabulous Tafona Ervin, the Executive Director of the Foundation for Tacoma Schools.
Thank you. Oh, she's too kind. Thank you. You know, the inner cheer coach in me wants to make everyone get up and do a bit of an energizer, but I'm in heels, so you guys get a pass. You're welcome. I do want to thank you all for joining us this morning, particularly for carving time out of your busy schedules. It is incredible the amount of work you all are juggling each and every day to help children achieve success in this community. It's even more incredible the fact that you all will come together each and every year to help us figure out these complex challenges that face our students in Tacoma. And so for that, I'm very, very grateful and thankful to have a community like you in Tacoma. I want to give acknowledgement first, however, to my staff. It has been an interesting month, and I know and recognize when folks are taxed and when pressure is high that things seem to fall through the cracks, but these guys actually rose to the occasion. They were here until wee hours of the night making sure this room was set, that you all had the food you needed, and hopefully enough coffee to get you through this morning. So if I can have the staff around the room just stand for a moment, and if you all could just help me acknowledge and thank the Foundation for Tacoma Students team. Each one of you are so incredible, very dynamic. I am really blessed to have them behind me in this work. I want to also give a thanks to our communications and data team. The report in front of you, which if I have to say so myself, is probably one of the best reports we've produced, is a testament to their hard work and diligence over the last 6 months. Yes, it takes 6 months to produce this, so please read all 41 pages front to back. But I want to thank them for their work. Also, the Star Center, the staff, especially Tacoma Public Schools Gray Middle School. What a fabulous song they did for us this morning. We're so thankful to have them. Please give all of those folks a round of applause as well. So let me dive in. Let me also say this might be a bit dry for some, but super critical for really going to be meaningful about the work we're doing ahead. Today we released the 2019 Impact Report, and in it, it has data that spans across the cradle to career continuum. In it, it has measures in which you all had decided early on were important for us as a community to continue to review. I want to be very clear that today is not a day just of celebrating, nor should that ever be the purpose of these events. Today is a day to see the momentum that has come from us rallying together and working hard, but then also figuring out where do we need to go deeper and what do we need to be paying attention to in the year ahead. And in fact, I'm going to be challenging most of you throughout my time here this morning to think thoughtfully about how you're going to lean in, think differently, strategize creatively in order for us to address some of the disparities that we're seeing in our community. The Graduate Tacoma Community Movement, as defined by Board Chair Bamford Hunt, is all of you. You all make up this movement. You all are working every day to support children in our community. You know the challenges they face. You interface with their families. You see the factors that continue to compound on them that are preventing them from achieving success. And you all are trying to do your own programs and juggle how do you be creative in that way at the same time. And that's hard. And we realize that. Our role is not to tell you how to do your job, but figure out ways to make it easier for you to do your job. Find best practices or research, identifying dollars that could be aligned and filtered into this community to connect you to other parts of the community that perhaps could help you make your programs better, and yet you didn't even realize it. Our role is just to be as much of a support to you as possible so you all can continue to do the good work that you are doing. And you all knew early on that you had to figure out what was it we were shooting for. Most of you in this room probably were on that journey with the foundation when it tried to establish its goal. And in 2010, as Board Chair Bamford Hunt mentioned, we set a bold goal, a really audacious one that said we were going to increase by 50% the high school graduation rate for Tacoma Public School students, as well as the college completion rate. And if I'm being honest, we've only realized half of that goal. We also said that success would require measuring the gaps that exist between students of color, those are in poverty, disenfranchised populations like English language learners and or students impacted by housing insecurity or homelessness. We knew that we had to center equity in the conversation. And if I'm being very transparent, you can't rise all tides or boats or whatever the saying is unless you're actually explicitly going deep on the kids that need us the most. Thinking about the students who are furthest away from opportunities, identifying what we need to do differently to help them get to an equal playing field so that then we can figure out how do we achieve success for all students. You all were really audacious and very astute, if I have to say, in 2010 about centering equity. And now that we've seen positive gains by and large across the continuum, there is still so much more work to do. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But first, we'll address the positive gains that we've seen. So it's really incredible to see the work that community organizations and you all are doing each and every day. The first gain is always a bright spot for me. This impact is really grounded around transitions and what happens in a child's life when they're transitioning from one milestone to another. Take, for example, elementary to middle school. Sixth grade achievement is one of our highest performing indicators. And honestly, that's a testament to a lot of our school officials, particularly our counselors, and the way they're wrapping their hands around their families, the community-based organizations that are within those schools. In fact, if you turn to page 16, at some point, you'll see a really great spotlight of a school whose counseling staff and others have identified different ways in which they are helping transitioning fifth graders find their way to their schools in a very seamless way. I have both an elementary school student and a middle school student, and I can tell you, in elementary school, my child loves recess, and he is excited every day when he could tell me what they did at recess. Whereas in middle school, my son is like, I just wanted to get out of sixth period because I was so tired, right? And getting ready for the next one. He's balancing 6 different courses on top of extracurricular activities. That's different than what elementary school students are doing. This transition peak here shows us from baseline to current how students are faring in passing all or all but one course now that they have 6+ classes that they're juggling each and every day. And what's even nice about this particular indicator is that the gaps for most of our students, particularly those of color and impacted by poverty, have nearly closed or are close to 0, which is absolutely great. Oh, yes, clap for that. Next is college entry exams, and again, credit is always going to be given where credit is due. Tacoma Public Schools administrators, staff, and especially their board of directors made a very innovative decision when they said, we are going to remove the barriers that are compounded on students, particularly our marginalized populations, and we're going to give these opportunities to students who need it most. Instead of a student needing to navigate how to get to a test site, register for a test site, pay for the test, and then study for it, Tacoma Public Schools offers that in school 1 day, 2 days a year if you think of juniors, and giving every single child the opportunity to take that exam so that they are better prepared and ready for if they want to pursue a college degree, they already have one of the barriers removed from them. Now we see more than 99% of Tacoma Public Schools taking that exam each and every year. Now that is an incredible testament to removing barriers, being creative in its efforts so that every child is starting to get an equal playing field. What we do know about this particular indicator is now, as a community, we need to turn our efforts to how do we help the students who really want to do well on those exams towards increasing their composite scores. Because for my higher ed folks or those who know anything about college access, the higher your SAT scores are, the more likely you might be to get into college. More importantly, the higher those scores are, the more likely you are to get the financial aid or scholarships that you need to be successful in college. And so we had a great partnership this year, and I do want to call out my friends from Enhanced Prep, I know they're in the room somewhere, who said, let's figure out how do we partner with you, Tacoma, and find ways to offer opportunities for students to take prep courses. It was the first time that we did this, and by and large, every site was full. Every student who wanted to be a part of those training sessions for preparing for college, they had that free of charge, accessible to them with the help that they need. That's how community leans in and gets creative about helping students achieve success. Now, I don't need to remind you all because Superintendent Santorno and her fabulous staff have already released the data, but four-year graduation rate is up yet again. And what I would note about this particular indicator is not just the success we've seen with students graduating, 89.6%, or I'm sorry, 89.3%, but rather paying close attention to the students who are most marginalized, paying attention to English language learners or homeless students and students impacted by poverty. What you'll see on page 23 is a really great graph of how Tacoma Public Schools fares against the state of Washington and the two largest districts in our state, which is Seattle Public Schools and Spokane Public Schools. And for all but one of those areas, Tacoma Public Schools students are outpacing the state average, Seattle Public School, and Spokane Public Schools for all of those students who are most disenfranchised from opportunities. That tells us that we are a resilient community and students have the ability to achieve success, and that we shouldn't pigeonhole them into a box that perhaps they're not capable or able, but rather continue to set high expectations for them that they can and will achieve success when a community leans in. So I'm grateful to be able to share the comparisons because it is the momentum that we need to go into the next year about the work that we're doing, the work we should continue to do, the work that we should be thinking differently about. But it doesn't stop there. And while four-year graduation has seen an increase, likewise, five-year graduation rate has also seen an increase. And just know, five-year graduation was more of the community's goal that said we wanted to give students the opportunity within their five-year time frame to walk across that stage and get their high school diploma. And so we've begun measuring the five-year extended graduation rate in 2010, and we have also seen steady increases for those students. Most notably, is that for the first time in history, we see Pacific Islander students graduating at the top of the class at 95% over every ethnic group in that race. That is something to applaud. While there's a slight dip overall, we are seeing students of color, those impacted by poverty, those others who fall in the housing insecure, or those who are English language learners, they are rising up. So friends, know that our kids are capable. Our kids are able. We've just got to give them and continue to push the supports that they need. So I mentioned we're not here to just celebrate success. We're here to talk about opportunities. And more explicitly, we're here to name the inequities that exist for our students so that we can see a difference over time. So let's talk about some of those opportunities. Superintendent Santorno talked a little bit about the critical times we are facing right now in education, particularly as it pertains to budget cuts and such by the local legislature. What I would say about that is, while community has stepped up and leaned in a number of ways, it might be challenging for you too to think about your programming, either in buildings or with partner schools in this district. And we need to think differently about how we're going to adapt to that. We are an adaptive community, and so the thought process of that starts today, and I'm going to challenge you all to think about that in just a few minutes. But first, I want to just call out a few data points that we need to think about. 8th grade math is one in which have many implications. I'm taking a note. If you were at the Palmer Scholars Luncheon earlier this week and you heard Superintendent Reichdale speak, he noted that we still need carpenters, we still need mechanics, we still need folks who are going to come out and service our refrigerators or whatever that might be. And yet there are implications for math in that. And so I know I used to say, I'm not going to use math when I get older. In fact, I tell my staff now, I can't really count. I'm just kidding. But I defer to other people because I put in my mindset that math wasn't for me. And sometimes that's true for students in our schools now, particularly students of color and female students. So how do we change that narrative? We see that we're flat from baseline. About 67% of students are passing algebra or geometry with a C or better. And overall, we're also seeing that there is some real gaps that exist when we disaggregate that data by race and ethnicity, particularly those in poverty. Anywhere from a 13 to a 29-point gap exists for students on this particular indicator. So what should this be telling you? we've got to do something different. If we're going to close the gap for students in poverty, we've got to be creative about how we are engaging with them, the tools and resources that we're giving with them, how we are helping them to best understand and conceptualize math concepts, not just by way of a standard textbook setting, but creatively. How do you apply that to real life? How do you think about that in your everyday? How does Minecraft, or I don't even know, the other game that kids are playing today, use math to inform, their ways that they look at it? That's how we get creative with helping students realize that they have that potential. Another data point that we want to just call attention to, where I think community has a really good opportunity to lean in, and that's attendance. Attendance, by and large, is an indicator where we have just seen persistently high chronic absenteeism rates for students in Tacoma. Many factors, they'll play into this. I'm taking a page out of a presentation the Greater Tacoma Community Foundation did a couple years back, where a kiddo was walking to class, and he had a teacher standing at the door looking a little disappointed, and he says, "Sorry I'm late, but I went to bed hungry. I really didn't have a place to sleep, and I had a lot of family issues going on last night." Oftentimes, when students are missing school, it's not because they're not interested in coming to school and learning or meeting the expectations that we have on them. There are these environmental factors that are happening in our community that are preventing them from thinking about how do they actually show up every day and are ready to learn when they enter that classroom. We as a community have an opportunity to think about that differently. How are we wrapping our hands around our students? How are we giving them resources and access? How are we removing the barriers that continue to compound and impede their progress in school? And that's where I would say leaning in as a community is certainly an area for us to consider. What I would also note, particularly for this, is that you're going to hear from a good friend and a partner from Big Brothers Big Sisters who's going to talk a bit about how perhaps the programs in which they offer helps to address this. And so, again, an example of how community can lean in and actually make a difference on this particular indicator. I will just note briefly, this particular indicator, when disaggregated, has a range from 6 to 24 points of a gap for students impacted by poverty and those of color, whereby Native American students, and let me define too, we have changed our language around Hispanic to Latinx to be more inclusive geographically, as well as by way of gender. And so for students who are Latinx or Native American, you see the range and the breadth of what's happening, where we need to be more intentional, explicitly identifying resources for those populations, thinking about what we need to do differently in order to help them achieve success. Finally, the area where I'm really passionate about, being someone who comes from higher education and would argue that it was my pathway out of poverty, is college completion. We as a community set a goal that we would also increase the college completion rates of students who are entering into a post-secondary institution 1 year after graduating. And we have not yet doubled down in the way that we need to in order to see that actually happen. In fact, we're down 4 points over baseline as we have been tracking. Yes, you see that this is 2010 to 2012. Note that there's a delay in reporting data, particularly because students are still in school. It takes them about 6 years to have accurate data reported, and we use that through National Clearinghouse. But you'll see all of that in the footnotes when you turn to page 27 and read that later. What I will say, though, is if we really wanted to think about how we've transformed as a community, not only our influence and impact in a school district for high school graduation, I challenge us to turn our attentions to college completion. By and large, half of the students who are enrolling into college after graduating from Tacoma Public Schools enter a 2 or 4 year institution right here in our backyard. We have 8 technical, private, public 2 and 4 year institutions, which gives our students an opportunity to stay local, to be invested in. The reality is they are going to be you in the next 10 or 20 years, and you are going to be in Arizona soaking up the sun, I'm sure. But if we don't invest in them now and give them those opportunities, then this room will be as empty as my front tables. I acknowledge that these tables are empty as well, and so I will work on that next year when we do more recruiting. Nevertheless, what I would say is college completion is an area for us to consider. You might have seen some publication that we've done around a partnership with our friends at Degrees of Change who have been working on persistence and completion for all of their career. They are going to help us lead what we need to do and think about differently. They're going to be talking talking with many of you, and they probably already have, about what is it going to take for a community to wrap around and support the services necessary for students to achieve success. They're going to be working with anchor institutions to start like UWT and TCC to ask the questions where our students are going. What do you need from us? How can we help you? What do we need to do differently in order to improve these outcomes? I hope that I can report this time next year the great success that we've seen in information gathering and even small wins. And that's going to be my commitment over the next year, is figuring out how do we double down in this particular area. My last note about this here graph is that the total line up top is the total number of students who graduated in 2018. When you begin to go down, you see who actually enrolled 1 year after they graduated, how many of those students persisted 1 year after they enrolled, and then from there, as we look through the continuum, for those who enrolled in 2000 and I think that's 11 or 12, how many of them actually graduated? I encourage you to dig deeper if you're interested in this data and figure out the questions that we should be trying to consider as we are improving this outcome in the years to come. So that was a lot, high level, really quick, hopefully passionate enough data to get you to start thinking about, where do I fit? What's my role? How can I help? And if you're not thinking that, I wonder why you're here. So I'm going to ask you to turn and talk for a moment. You should have received a data card when you walked in at registration. You could have chosen whichever data card you're most interested in. If you didn't choose a data card, not a big deal. Turn to any of the pages in the impact report and talk about that. But what I'm going to ask you to do is to talk amongst yourself about the data as you see it, and what are the factors you think are contributing to why the data is what it is? If we're talking about 8th grade math, why do we think we're still at a 67%? Why do we see black students not performing as well as white students? What are the questions that we should be asking each other in order to figure out how do we actually address strategy to inform our practices moving forward? You're going to have about 10 minutes to talk amongst yourself, and then I'm going to bring you back in to wrap us all up. So have fun talking. I look forward to hearing your conversations. Walking around the room in just the brief moment that I did, it was really powerful to hear the conversations that you all were having. It strikes me that there is a great deal of a wealth of knowledge in this room, passionate individuals, and frankly, creative folks who can find answers to these complex challenges that we face. What will be more interesting is how you all show up in the year ahead to continue to realize some of those. In fact, later this morning, we are going to invite you to several different breakout sessions where you'll continue this conversation, you'll go a bit deeper, and you'll figure out how you all are going to lean in to actually realize that.